August 24, 2023. Japan begins releasing treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the Pacific Ocean. Within hours, China responds with the most comprehensive trade ban in the history of Sino-Japanese relations. Every single piece of Japanese seafood banned immediately, no exceptions. The announcement sent shockwaves through fishing communities across Japan. Billions of dollars in trade evaporated overnight. Fishermen who'd spent generations building their livelihoods watched export markets disappear in real time. And the Chinese government framed it as a matter of public safety, protecting its citizens from radioactive contamination. But here's what makes this story far more complicated than the headlines suggest. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, had already approved Japan's water release plan. Scientists from multiple countries reviewed the data and concluded the discharge posed negligible risk to human health or marine ecosystems. So, why did China impose a total ban that goes far beyond what science recommends? Why did this become the biggest seafood trade crisis in modern history? And what does a dispute about treated water reveal about the real state of relations between Asia's two largest economies? This isn't just about fish. It's about power, politics, and how scientific facts get weaponized in geopolitical conflicts. Let's dive into the hidden truth behind the seafood ban that's reshaping East Asia. First, we need to understand what actually happened at Fukushima, because the story starts not in 2023, but 12 years earlier with one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake strikes off Japan's coast, triggering a massive tsunami. Waves over 40 feet high slam into the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, overwhelming its defenses. Cooling systems fail. 3 reactor cores melt down. Hydrogen explosions blow apart containment buildings. The disaster forces the evacuation of over 150,000 people. Radiation spreads across the region, and Japan faces a nuclear crisis that will take decades to resolve. But here's the problem that's been building ever since. To keep the damaged reactor cores cool, water must be continuously pumped over them. That water becomes contaminated with radioactive materials. For 12 years, that contaminated water has been treated, filtered, and stored in massive tanks covering the Fukushima site. By 2023, over 1.3 million tons of water sat in more than 1,000 storage tanks. The site was running out of space. TEPCO, the plant's operator, and the Japanese government had to make a decision: keep building tanks indefinitely, or release the treated water into the ocean. They chose release, but not before putting the water through an extensive treatment process. The system is called ALPS, Advanced Liquid Processing System. It removes 62 different radioactive isotopes from the contaminated water. After treatment, the water contains radioactive elements at levels far below international safety standards, with one exception: tritium. Tritium is a radioactive form of hydrogen. It's extremely difficult to remove from water because, chemically, it is water. Trying to separate tritium from normal water molecules is technically possible, but economically impractical on this scale. Here's the thing though. Tritium is relatively low risk as radioactive materials go. It emits weak beta radiation that can't penetrate human skin. You'd have to ingest massive amounts for it to pose health risks, and critically, every nuclear power plant in the world releases tritium into the environment during normal operations. France, the United States, South Korea, Canada, and yes, China, all discharge tritium-containing water from their nuclear facilities. China's Qinshan and Yangjiang nuclear plants release tritium at levels significantly higher than what Japan planned for Fukushima. Japan's plan called for diluting the treated water to tritium levels of 1,500 becquerels per liter, far below the World Health Organization's drinking water limit of 10,000 becquerels per liter. The water would be released gradually over 30 to 40 years, mixed with massive amounts of seawater to ensure dilution. Before proceeding, Japan invited the International Atomic Energy Agency to conduct a comprehensive safety review. For 2 years, IAEA experts analyzed the data, inspected the facilities, and evaluated the environmental impact. In July 2023, they issued their report. The conclusion: Japan's plan is consistent with international safety standards. The radiological impact on people and the environment would be negligible. Scientists from the United States, South Korea, and even some independent Chinese researchers acknowledged the plan's safety. The consensus among nuclear experts was clear. This was not a dangerous discharge, but science and politics don't always align. And when Japan began releasing the water on August 24, 2023, China was ready with a response that had nothing to do with science. The ban was immediate and total. All aquatic products from Japan banned, not just fish from waters near Fukushima, everything. Scallops from Hokkaido, nowhere near Fukushima. Sea cucumbers from Okinawa, over 1,000 miles away. Even processed seafood products with Japanese ingredients. China's customs authority announced it would reject all Japanese seafood imports, citing the need to protect Chinese consumers' health and prevent nuclear-contaminated food from entering the country. Hong Kong, following Beijing's lead, implemented its own ban, blocking imports from 10 Japanese prefectures, including Tokyo. The economic impact was devastating. Japan exports about 870 billion yen worth of seafood annually, with China and Hong Kong representing roughly 42% of that market. Overnight, Japan's seafood industry lost access to its largest customer. Scallop fishermen in Hokkaido were hit hardest. China had been buying 80% of Japan's scallop exports. Prices collapsed. Inventory piled up. Fishing communities faced financial ruin. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because if this was really about food safety, China's response doesn't make scientific sense. First, the ban includes seafood from regions with zero connection to Fukushima. There's no scientific rationale for banning scallops from northern Japan based on water discharge from a plant hundreds of miles south. Second, China continues to import seafood from other countries that discharge similar or higher levels of tritium from their nuclear facilities. If tritium contamination is the concern, why single out Japan? Third, China's own nuclear plants release tritium at levels higher than Fukushima's planned discharge. If Chinese coastal waters receiving tritium discharge are safe for fishing, why aren't Japanese waters? The science doesn't support a total ban. So what's really happening? Politics. Specifically, the politics of punishing Japan for decisions Beijing opposes. China has been increasingly frustrated with Japan's foreign policy direction. Japan has strengthened its military alliance with the United States. It's expanded defense cooperation with Australia, India, and Southeast Asian nations. It's taken a harder line on Taiwan, with Japanese officials explicitly stating that instability around Taiwan directly threatens Japan's security. Japan has also joined international criticism of China's human rights record, its crackdown in Hong Kong, and its military activities in the South China Sea. From Beijing's perspective, Japan has aligned itself firmly with the United States in a new Cold War against China. The water discharge gave China an opportunity to impose economic pain on Japan, while framing it as a public safety issue. It's economic coercion disguised as health policy. This tactic isn't new for China. Beijing has repeatedly used trade restrictions as political weapons. When South Korea agreed to host US missile defense systems, China imposed restrictions on Korean tourism and entertainment. When Australia called for a COVID origin investigation, China hit Australian wine, barley, and coal with tariffs. When Lithuania allowed Taiwan to open a representative office, China blocked Lithuanian exports. The seafood ban follows this playbook perfectly. Create economic pain. Frame it as a domestic policy issue. Force the target country to choose between economic damage and policy changes. Beijing wants, but there's another dimension. Domestic politics in China. The Chinese government has spent years cultivating nationalist sentiment among its population. Social media campaigns emphasize foreign threats and the need for China to stand strong against outside pressure. The Fukushima water discharge became a perfect vehicle for nationalist messaging. Chinese state media saturated domestic news with alarming coverage about radioactive contamination, threatening Chinese waters. Graphics showed ominous animations of radiation spreading across the Pacific. Commentators accused Japan of poisoning the ocean for generations. The coverage was scientifically misleading, but politically effective. It generated public outrage, which in turn justified the government's harsh response. Chinese citizens demanded action. The government delivered. For President Xi Jinping, currently managing economic challenges and attempting to project strength internationally, the seafood ban served domestic political purposes. It showed the government protecting Chinese people. It demonstrated resolve against a perceived threat. It reinforced narratives about standing up to historical enemies. Japan, after all, carries enormous historical baggage in China. Memories of World War II atrocities, the Nanjing massacre, wartime occupation. All these remain politically sensitive in China. Nationalist rhetoric easily taps into these historical grievances. The water discharge became more than an environmental issue. It became another chapter in the historical narrative of Japanese aggression, now environmental rather than military, but threatening Chinese people nonetheless. Never mind that the science doesn't support this narrative. In politics, perception often matters more than facts. So where does this leave Japan? Economically damaged, certainly, but also politically resolved not to back down. The Japanese government has vigorously defended its decision, pointing to IAEA approval and scientific consensus. Prime Minister Kishida has called China's ban unacceptable and not based on science. Japan has even filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization, arguing the ban violates international trade rules. Japan is also working to diversify its seafood export markets. It's promoting Japanese seafood in the United States, Europe, and Southeast Asia. The government has allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to support affected fishermen and develop new markets. But rebuilding export channels takes time, and the fishing communities, suffering right now, can't wait years for new markets to develop. There's also a deeper strategic question. Does Japan accommodate Chinese pressure by halting the water discharge? Or does it proceed, despite economic pain, refusing to let Beijing dictate its domestic policies? So far, Japan has chosen the latter. Water releases continue on schedule. The message is clear. Japan won't be economically coerced into abandoning a plan, approved by international experts and necessary for decommissioning. Fukushima. This resolve reflects a broader shift in Japanese foreign policy. For decades, Japan prioritized economic engagement with China, even when political tensions rose. Keeping trade flowing was the priority. But that's changing. Japan increasingly views China as a long-term strategic threat, not just an economic partner. If that means accepting economic costs to maintain policy independence, Tokyo appears willing to pay that price. The seafood ban, then, isn't just about fish. It's a test case for whether economic pressure can force Japan to change course. So far, the answer is no. Meanwhile, the scientific community watches with frustration, because this dispute illustrates how science gets lost when politics takes over. The IAEA, marine biologists, radiation experts, they've all weighed in. The data is clear. The discharge, as planned, poses negligible health and environmental risks. Countries should base their responses on evidence, not politics. But evidence alone doesn't drive decisions in international relations. Power does. Interests do. Historical grievances do. And in this case, China's political interests outweigh scientific consensus. The long-term consequences remain uncertain. Will China eventually lift the ban once domestic attention moves on? Will Japan's fishing industry permanently lose its largest market? Will other countries follow China's lead or side with scientific assessments? What's already clear is that the seafood ban has deepened the divide between China and Japan. It's another brick in the wall, separating Asia's two largest economies. And it's a reminder that in the modern world, even technical, scientific issues become battlegrounds in larger geopolitical struggles. The hidden truth behind the seafood ban isn't hidden at all. Once you look beyond the surface, it's about power. It's about two countries with fundamentally different visions for Asia's future. It's about historical wounds that never fully healed. And it's about how easily science can be weaponized when politics demands it. Japan releases water that scientists say is safe. China bans seafood that scientists say poses no threat. And the real victims aren't governments or policies. They're the fishermen on both sides, caught in a conflict that has nothing to do with the safety of their catch and everything to do with the contest for influence in the Indo-Pacific. The seafood ban exploded, not because the science demanded it, but because the politics required it. And until the politics change, the science won't matter. That's the truth they're not telling you.